Hi, my name is Amanda. I'm the owner of this channel. I'm a survivor of domestic violence, and I'm a victim advocate and have been for over 10 years. My whole point to make this channel is to spread awareness of domestic violence and to advocate for those people who have been victims of domestic violence. I'm here to be a safe place for you. I'm here to be a safe place to tell your story, to spread awareness, to create safety, to create a movement, and to help create better laws for those people who abuse other people. And this is my story. I wish I could say that, hi, my name is Amanda, and I am a survivor of domestic violence by one person, but I can't say that. Hi, my name is Amanda, and I'm a survivor of domestic violence, neglect, abuse my entire childhood. And I'm here to tell my story because I want to help other people be able to tell their stories, and I want to help prevent this thing from happening to other people to the best of my ability. When I was born, my mom almost had me in the middle of the road. My mom, her and I have a great relationship right now. I have not seen her in almost 7 years, and she lives in a different state than I do, but my mom left me and my sister and I with my dad when I was 2 weeks old, and my dad primarily raised us to the best of his ability. He was the only person. I'm gonna try not to cry because I lost my dad on my son's birthday in 2023, but he was the only person in my life, my entire life, childhood, and in my adulthood. He was the one person who was always there for me and always stable and safe. He was always a safe place for me to go no matter what. So I'm very thankful that my dad raised me. I'm very thankful that he was in my life, but there's things that he did not know, and there's things that he didn't know that he could have prevented, but he didn't know about them until later on in the years when I was an adult. So my mom was very violent toward my dad. She actually abused him physically and emotionally and in every way you can think of. She herself was abused as a child, and she didn't have a good upbringing. My dad primarily raised us, but there were times where we did live with our mom, or I lived with my mom, and during those times I sustained my first abuse from my mom's dad, my papa. And I was 3 years old, and I remember waking up in the middle of the night. I was staying the night with them, and they lived in a trailer, and I stayed the night with them. And my grandma slept on the couch. My papa, he slept in the bedroom of the trailer. It was like a little travel trailer. And I always wore nightgowns to bed. That's what my mom put me in, and I just remember waking up to him. I'm just gonna put it that way. I got up and I went to the living room, and I woke my grandmother up, and she was not the nicest person in the world, and she told me to go back and lay down with my grandfather, and I did not want to. That's the only thing I remember about that, but I never told anybody that happened to me by my mom's dad. And so it made me think that I wonder if he did anything like that to his children, because he did have 3 daughters. That was my first memory of any kind of abuse. Another memory that I had while I was living with my mother was her boyfriend at the time, who is now an absconder in the state of Arkansas, and he is a predator. But I woke up on the floor with him with his pants undone, and I was wearing a nightgown. I think I was 6 or 7, and I don't know if anything happened to me. I do not remember. I just remember waking up with him with his arms around me and his pants were undone, and I asked for a glass of water, and while he was getting me a glass of water, my mom came in drunk, and that's that's about all I remember from that. When I was 5, I lived with my dad, and we went over to my parents' house where she had a brother who was like 15 years younger than her. So he was probably about 15 years old, 16 years old, and we were playing hide and seek. And I was 5. I went to go hide under the bed, and he was under there, and he just like put his finger up, like, don't, be quiet, don't say anything. And I was like, okay. So I'm at the edge of the bed, and he's like back towards the wall, and this is probably like a full-size bed. It's not that big, and we're laying there hiding from my stuff, and he exposes himself to me. And I knew that that was not okay. I mean, he was 10 years older than me. I was 5, and he was like 15 or 16. And he was perverted towards me for 10 years. He never touched me, but he was perverted towards me for 10 years. I had a son who tried to, when I was 13 years old, he exposed himself to me, on me. He poked holes through our rooms. We're next door to each other, and he poked holes through the sheetrock in the closet, because his back of his closet was my wall on the other side, and we had just remodeled that house not that long before then. And I remember like putting pieces of toilet paper in there. I'm like, where are these holes coming from? And I put posters, and he was peeking in on me. When I would shower, our shower was right down the hall. I would shower, and I would, wrap myself in a towel, and I would go through the hallway, go to my bedroom, and I just get dressed in there. And that was like my privacy right there. The bathroom was not very big. And when I found those holes, I stopped doing that. It freaked me out. But there was one time when I was 15 years old, I think I was a freshman in high school, sophomore in high school or something. And it was one of the last weeks that they were there before their mom left my dad. But he went out to go feed the cattle, and we lived out in the country, and we didn't really have like high curtain, long curtains. We had those high curtains, and the only thing that I could see was the field. The field could see me. There was really, there was acres and acres of land. So I didn't really have mini blinds or anything. We just didn't have those living out in the middle of nowhere. But I remember, I was wearing a bra and panties, and I was bent over blow drying my hair, and I felt somebody looking at me, and I looked up, and he was staring at me through the window, and I screamed and dropped the hairdryer, and it was still going. And when I screamed, my dad like runs in there, and he's like, what's going on? Because this is like really early, 6 o'clock in the morning, he didn't have to be to work till 7. And I'm like not letting my dad in. I'm like, I'm not dressed. And he's like, well, put some clothes on. What the heck is going on? And so I like put clothes on real quick, and I started having a panic attack, and I started crying, and I was shaking, and my like, you need to be quiet. And she was also very abusive. I'll get to that too. But my son comes in, he goes, what'd you do? See a cow? And I went off on him. I mean, I was 15 years old, and I went off on him. About a week later, my dad and her separated, and I was very thankful for that. But that's just mild to what I went through during those 10 years of my childhood while my dad was at work. Not only was he at work, he also owned rental houses, and he also ran our farm. We had a ranch, essentially. We had cattle and a garden and farm and stuff. And so, he just didn't know. He was just trying to work hard. And, he thought that this woman who he had been with was going to take care of us. So it was just really awful. My childhood with my dad was good when he was there, and and he was strict on us, and I was the better of the children, I guess. I was the youngest of all 5 kids, and there was 3 sisters, and then my sister and I, which my sister didn't live there very often, but I was the youngest, and I was kind of the black sheep of the family because I wasn't blood related to these people. And I was chubby, and I didn't have a mom. My mom wasn't there. My dad was doing his best to raise me, and I was bullied. I was physically abused, mentally abused. abused all 10 years from that family. I was shoved into a closet after they put butter all over me. I was like 8 years old. They put butter all over me, duct taped me, and threw me in this. We had this long pantry, and that I could fit into, and they threw me in the pantry and shut the door and would not let me out. And I peed myself, and she didn't let me out until about an hour before my dad got there, and she made me go take a shower, and she told me that if I told anybody that she would essentially beat my ass. And I told him this later on when I was an adult, long after they had gotten a divorce, and I had children. So these were the types of things that happened to me. I had a sister that she, her and I are on good terms. I don't really talk to her much, but I guess that, she was being influenced by her older brother, and he was the one who was more abusing me in a way, trying to do things to me. But one time she straddled me, and I was probably like 10 years old, and she like grabbed me by my hair and just like started banging my head against the floor. We were in the middle of remodeling my dad's house or something, and he was at work, and it was just a crazy thing. I would get baseballs thrown at me, and like to learn how to slapped me one time when my dad had picked me up from my mom's, actually in Texas, and my dad, he drove all night and got back to Missouri late at night, and I slept in. I woke up after my dad had to go to work the next day, and I woke up and everybody was gone except for my sister who was there with me, and my sister was still sleeping because she'd stayed up pretty much all night with my dad while he was driving, and I was only in the 4th grade. She was like in the 8th grade, so and I was sitting at the kitchen table. My woke up and I said, "Is there anything I could eat? I'm hungry." And she backhanded me and busted my lip open. She backhanded my sister when my sister was 8 years old, the first day we met her. So she inflicted a lot of abuse on us, a lot of verbal abuse, a lot of physical abuse, not only on us, but one of her own sons. So it was horrible. It was a horrible upbringing, and my dad had no idea that it was happening because she hid it very well. So that was what happened. When I was a teenager, after my dad and my first got divorced, it was just my dad and I, and he went through a really dark place because that was his second divorce, and he lost everything almost except for the farmhouse. He lost multiple rental houses. That rental business was a big income. It brought a lot of income for us. My dad worked really, really hard, and he essentially lost everything because of her. And we kept the farmhouse, and so I became rebellious. My dad really wasn't there mentally for me. It was just him and I for a long time. He did the best he could, but I became very, very rebellious. I started becoming rebellious at 15 years old. I started drinking. I started smoking pot. 16 years old, I started doing drugs. I started using meth. I was smoking pot. I was drinking. Drinking was the biggest thing for me at that point in time. I was being influenced by my peers, and I just wanted to fit in. I wanted somebody to love me. And, by the time I was 17, I had already done many drugs. I had already tried many drugs. I had asked my dad after my sophomore year in high school, listen, I need to go move with my mom in Texas, because he was going through this whole thing, and I needed my mom at that time. I didn't have any other female, like, motherly figure. I didn't have anybody there to teach me anything. My older sister was the only one that was actually there trying to be supportive of me and show me right from wrong and all that kind of stuff. I didn't even, I don't know, I was kind of oblivious to a lot of things, and I was ignorant to a lot of common sense things, I guess. I was very book smart, very intelligent. So I went to Texas, and I lived with my mom after my sophomore year in high school. The summer between my sophomore year and my junior year, my relationship with my mom got really well. She worked, I got a job, I started going to school, my brother lived there, and everything seemed to be going great. And then my mom met a guy, and it was always, she always put the men first. And she knows this. She's told me several times I've always put the men first. I was not a good mom. And she was right. She just wasn't there as a mom. And you can't be a good mom when you're not there present for your children. So anyway, she started drinking again and doing drugs and whatever it is that she did, and essentially left my brother and I there. He was in the 8th grade. He was like 14, 15, and I was going into my junior year in high school. I worked and I helped pay the bills. I took my brother to school. My mom ended up trying to be abusive to my brother. She pushed him down. He landed into the glass coffee table. He pushed her back. He finally stood up and pushed her back, and then he ran. I was outside because she was screaming, and I just went outside. And I just remember this day very clearly. We were in Texas, and we lived in a trailer park, and she owned this big van that I hated. My brother comes running out, and he goes, "Run, run, run." Well, my mom, she was protected herself, and so we were scared. We were scared. We knew that she had been drinking, and this was not okay. So my brother, I'm like, where are we running to? We don't have anywhere to go. We didn't have a vehicle. You know, she had the keys to her other car. She had the keys to her van. He was freaking out. He was crying. He had got cut, and she came out, and we were trying to hide in the alley. And my brother goes, "Oh my gosh." And I look up, and my mom's in the van, and there's literally no room between the fence and the trailer, the back of the trailer houses in this little alley. The van, I mean, I'm talking like maybe a foot on each side. My mom was trying to run us over with the van. She was drunk. And we ran into some random person's house and into their back door, and they called 911. And I was essentially emancipated at 17 years old, and my brother was sent to live with my aunt. My mom was never physically abusive to me. She was mentally abusive to me when we were around her. She always told me I was mental, or I was too sensitive, and essentially I was just out in that way. I was like her. I've never been like that the way she was, but essentially I was like her, where I was very overly sensitive, but I didn't have a good upbringing. Either way, I was being abused. And so yeah, I was overly sensitive, especially as a 17-year-old girl. I was emancipated, and then eventually my dad came and picked me up with my new stepmom. I had a new stepmom who was younger than my dad. She had a little girl who was 10 years younger than I am. I didn't want to move, but I did. I moved back with my dad, and I finished out my senior year in Missouri. But I became extremely, extremely rebellious. I was using drugs. I was partying. I was being promiscuous. I was doing all the things that you don't need to do as a 17-year-old young woman. It was really bad. I was going to parties. I was waking up. I woke up with a man on top of me, a guy from another school. He was my age, but a guy on top of me in the middle of a dirt road in a truck. I didn't know how I got there. He was blacked out drunk. We were both blacked out drunk, so it's not like he, was doing anything that I wasn't doing. But when I was 17 years old, I went to a party with one of my friends, and she was the friend who was providing the drugs, who introduced me to the drugs and all the partying and stuff. And she had a boyfriend who they were off and on, and he was a well-known person. His parents were well-known people amongst the community. Very high status in the community, I guess, in the very small 5,000 people town that we lived in. His family was one of the higher status's family. They owned a real estate company, an insurance company, and stuff like that. So he was very popular on the football team, and he threw parties himself. But they were broken up, and I remember we were all just drinking and having a good time, and he kept bringing me a beer. Like, he brought me 2 beers. He kept, and it was opened and all that. He's like, here, drink up or whatever. And I remember taking a couple drinks of that beer, just that one beer, and I had just got there. And I woke up in my friend's car, on her passenger side of her car, with him on top of me. I was dating. I couldn't push. I didn't even have the strength to push him off. I had 2 drinks of a beer. That's it. That's all I had. I didn't have any drugs. I didn't have any marijuana. That's all. I remember somebody opening the car door, and I remember like trying to crawl out from underneath him and saying, help, help. And I remember seeing my friend, and she had a baseball bat, and she started just, doing what she needed to do to get him off of me. I think she was upset at me. I mean, that was her boyfriend, and that was not a good situation. Another guy from his class actually, got me dressed right there, fixed my clothes, and then physically carried me inside and put me in a bedroom and sat with the door closed with the chair in front of the door for hours. I remember just kept waking up, and I just kept waking up, and this guy was just sitting there staring at me, like making sure I was okay. I had a white hoodie on that wasn't mine. There was blood on it. I remember him waking me up saying, hey, Amanda, he was a guy, and he knows who he is. And he was a guy from my school. We went to different schools from this other guy. He was a guy from my school, and he goes, Amanda, I got to take you home. It's time to go home. So he didn't live too far from me. And I got in his vehicle, his car, and he went to go take me home, and he said, you need to put your hood up. Before you go into your house, you need to put your hood up. And I was like, it's hot outside. I don't, I don't feel like putting my hood up. He goes, Amanda, you need to put your hood up. So I put my hood up, put the hood up on the hoodie. I was missing my ring. I remember having like blood on me. I didn't know what was going on. And I was still very groggy, and I felt like the worst hangover in history that I've ever had. And I drank 2 sips of beer. Got home, went to go take a shower. I took the hoodie off. It was like stuck to me. It was stuck to my back. And I looked at myself in the mirror, and I had scratches on my face. I had bruises right here. I had scratches right here on my face. I had hickeys. I had bruising all over me. I had bruises on my arms, on my legs. I had deep scratches on my back. Like bloody scratches on my back. I didn't know what happened. I had no idea what happened. I didn't say anything to anybody. I didn't think that anybody would believe me. I didn't want my dad to be mad at me. I didn't think he would. I mean, obviously, I don't think he would. Now that I'm an adult, I don't think he would have ever been mad at me. He would have done everything he could to protect me and to put that guy, in jail, essentially. He was only 17, but I just didn't tell anybody. And when I was 17, and it sucked. After graduating high school, I just became very rebellious. My dad actually kicked me out of his house the day before my high school graduation. I don't blame him, because after that happened, that happened in November 19th of 1999. After that happened, I became extremely rebellious, and I had a really bad attitude. I was doing drugs, a lot of drugs, and drinking and partying and all that kind of stuff, and I was just being very rebellious. So my dad kicked me out. I had a friend that I was staying with, and I had my partying days for a long time, from the time I was 18 until I was 20 years old. Even when I was 20 years old, I was partying, but around that time I'd met and in 2003, January of 2003, I got pregnant. In February of 2003, I found out I was pregnant, and I was remodeling hotels. I was on the road, so I went back to Missouri, and I actually lived with my friend for a while until I was about 4 or 5 months pregnant. And then I actually moved in with my dad and my stepmom, and I did that until I got my own place. I was not in a relationship with he just really was not present during. I had nobody really. I had a friend that was there for me when I was pregnant, and she knows who she is. I'm not really friends with her anymore, but she was there for me for a long time, and I really appreciate her being there for me. But it was just kind of a toxic friendship anyway. But I gave birth to my son, and I was a single mom. I ended up getting pregnant with my daughter when my son was 9 months old. And when I was pregnant with her, my son and I started kind of seeing each other again off and on. We didn't really become an item until I had my daughter, and she was probably a month or so old. He asked me to actually be his girlfriend, which is, he never wanted anything to do with me before. So that was kind of surprising to me. And so we ended up having a relationship. It was kind of off and on for a while. We ended up moving in together when my daughter was about a year and a half old. And that's where the violence began. My daughter was about 15 or 16 months old the first time I got headbutted. He's now my and we weren't married at that time, but I'll refer to him as was an alcoholic in his 20s, and he was very verbally abusive, but he was also very physically abusive. I had a job and I worked, and he was taking care of the kids, and I came home at like 11 o'clock. I worked at Walmart. I came home at 11 o'clock at night one time, and my daughter, who was a year and a half old, was screaming. And I was like, well, she never screams. She's a very mild baby. She doesn't scream. Something's wrong with her. I thought she fell out of her crib or something. So I run upstairs and I pick her up, and she's just hyperventilating, screaming. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what in the world's going on? And I'm calming her down, and finally I got her calmed down, and she fell asleep. She just cried herself to sleep. Sorry. I went downstairs, and and his friend were there, and they were drinking. They were drunk. And I didn't know that they were drinking while I was at work. And I asked, why is she crying? And he was like, she wouldn't shut up. And I kind of got in an argument with him, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to bed. I went to bed, and the next morning I got up and I went to go change my daughter's diaper, and her butt was purple. There was a purple handprint on her butt, like a big purple handprint. I have pictures of it. The police report, those pictures, they took pictures of it. So I called the cops, and he got arrested. And they didn't arrest him. They didn't charge him with child abuse. They charged him with assault, simple assault. He went and stayed with his brother. I didn't really have anywhere to go. I was working at the time, but that was so long ago, that was in 2007 when that happened. And not long after that happened, I should have never went back to him, but he was the and at that point in time, he was the too, because I didn't have a dad for her either, but he was good when he wasn't drinking for the most part. So he apologized to me. He said, I'm really sorry. I'm not that kind of person. And I took him back. my son would scream without him there, and I needed help, and I didn't have a lot of money, and it was just one of those things. I depended upon on him because he did work. He was paying for most of the bills. I wasn't really making that much. I was working part-time. So I got back with him, and there's just a couple of incidences where he was drunk, and like he threw my phone out the window while we were driving down the road. He hit me in the face with the phone. He headbutted me. Little things like that. But the main incident that happened was in 2007. He was really drunk, and I was upset at him that he was drinking around the kids. You know, he got very violent when he was drinking, and I was like, you have to leave. I don't want you here. And, you know, he was yelling at me, and I just remember I was standing at the top of a stairs. We lived in a townhouse that had stairs, carpeted stairs, and they were pretty tall. And I was standing at the top of the stairs, and he was standing in front of me or whatever, and he was screaming at me, and I was just like, whatever. I went to go turn around to go down the stairs because I was trying to get away from him, and he grabbed a hold of my arms and like pulled me down and like pushed me, and I just toppled over and fell, you know, head over heels down the stairs. I ended up hitting the little closet door at the end of the stairs. I don't really remember much after that, other than I remember standing up and my arm was dangling. My left arm was dangling, like I couldn't move it. It was weird. It was a weird feeling. It didn't really like hurt. It was just like, what happened was it was dislocated. He dislocated my shoulder. I think I called his brother's girlfriend to come over. It was like in the evening time. It was probably 7, 8 o'clock at night, but I called her to come over. She was always on his side, but I think she knew that what was happening wasn't okay. I actually locked him out of the house that time. He went outside and I locked him out. He didn't bring his keys, or he had his keys, and I kept locking the door, and he ended up finally crawling through a window, and I told him if he didn't let her take the kids and he leave, or her watch the kids while they were sleeping, and he needed to leave, if he didn't let me do that so I can go to the hospital, that I was going to call the cops on him. And he didn't want to get arrested again. So he left. He went to his brother. They lived in the same apartment complex. So she came over, watched the kids. This is to my knowledge. This is what I remember. So I don't know if everything's going to be perfectly, you know, this was a long time ago. This is in 2007, almost 18 years ago, 20 years ago. And anyway, I went to the hospital, and which happened to be my doctor, the one that delivered my son, he put my shoulder back in place, and he said I had a dislocated shoulder. He put my arm in a sling, and then he told me I wasn't allowed to leave the hospital. And I didn't understand why. Next thing I know, the cops were at the hospital. And the cop that was at the hospital was a guy that I had known for years. I grew up with him. He went to the same school. We went to the same church. May you rest in peace, Landon. You were my savior more than once. He gave me this yellow piece of paper, and it said domestic violence on it. And I didn't know what domestic violence meant until that moment, until he explained to me that what's happening to me, the abuse that was happening to me, is called domestic violence. And I was ignorant to that. I did not know that what was going on, the physical violence that was going on, had a name. It was called domestic violence. And he said, there is a place, there's safe houses and stuff you can go to. And I was like, I had no idea. He said, listen, you're going to follow me to your house, because he knew he was actually my neighbor. He lived behind me in a house. I lived in the apartments like right across the street from him. He said, you're gonna follow me. I'm going to take you to your house. And I followed him in my car. I drove one-handed, and he knocked on the door, and he was in front of me. He had his arms like spread out where I couldn't, he goes, you're gonna stay behind me, don't move. And so he knocked on the door, and my actually came back, and he was there with his brother and his brother's girlfriend or whatever, and he called him out, and he put him in handcuffs, and he took him to jail. and he bailed himself out of jail the next day, and he came back. It was just really bad. He ended up going on the road, and he remodeled hotels for a living for a long time, so he was gone off and on for a long time. I didn't really stay with him, but I stayed in that apartment because I had 2 kids. Wasn't really making enough money. He went on the road like the next week. He left, and I felt okay. And I ended up having to have my first shoulder surgery. And my friend and her mom were there to help me with my kids, and that was wonderful. There was another time when he came home visiting where he had butted me, and I drove over to my friend's house, her grandma's house, and you know, I had some marks around my neck, and I had a little spot where he had butted me, and I had my kids with me. And this went on off and on for years. We split up. I got my own apartment. Fast forward to 2010. My dad came to me one time, and he said, listen, he wants to get back with you. I think that you guys should work it out. And so I got back with him. We weren't even time yet. I got back with him. And I hated it. I didn't want to him. I did it because I was trying to please everybody else. I remember trying to call my mom saying, I didn't want to. And he had one agenda, which was to get, and it worked. We got August and September, October, November. 3 months later, I had 3 surgeries that year. My gallbladder taken out. I had a shoulder surgery that year, and then I had a thermal ablation on my uterus that year, and that comes into play. So I had an ablation done where I had endometriosis, where I was bleeding too much, and so they basically cauterized my uterus. So I haven't had a period since 2011. But I remember having the surgery and being like, I don't even want him to be here. Like, I didn't feel comfortable with him. I didn't feel safe with him. I wasn't in love with him. I didn't love him like that. I didn't want him around. But he was drinking a lot back then, and again, off and on. I mean, always. He was a functioning alcoholic, I guess, for a long time. And so anyway, my daughter had a pageant, and then we took the kids out to eat, and then they went to their friend. Like, my son went to my sister's house, my daughter went to her friend's house, and it was just him and I. And I guess we were just going to hang out and have our own date night or whatever. Well, he ended up getting drunk. We got into an argument, and he left to go to the bar. And so I left, and there was a friend of the family who lived in the same town, and I went to her house. And when I went there, and this was even though I was being abused being abused with him, leaving that night and going to this lady's house was the biggest mistake of my life. Because when I got there, her son was there, who was about my age. Known him for years. We'd all known him for years, but he wasn't like the best person in the world. He'd been in and out of prison, and I'd had a fling with him. When we were split up, I had a fling with this guy. Just a small fling in like 2010 or something when I was split up. He was there, and we were all just sitting around talking. I was telling them what was going on, and next thing I know, at that point in time, kicked down their door, like ran in there like drunk, and like pointed at me. And I was sitting at the desk, at the lady's desk in her bedroom, and her son was sitting on her bed, and we were all just kind of hanging out talking. We'd all known each other for years. They've known him for years. And he pointed at me, and he was like, it's over, you're screwing this guy, and blah 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 blah. And at that point, it had only been like 3 days since my surgery, 3 or 4 days since my surgery. Like, I had just had surgery on my uterus. Like, I couldn't cheat. I couldn't do anything physically. And it was over. I didn't have a place to go to. He changed the locks from there the next day, I was able to go get my stuff. He had threw my computer on the railroad tracks. I was going to college at that time. He threw my computer on the railroad tracks, and I had my own truck at that point in time because with my income taxes and my school money, I was able to buy my own vehicle. And 3 months after I got, we started our, and in the middle of that, I started the relationship with that other man. And my was dating somebody else very quickly right after that happened. I think he was already seeing somebody, but I was seeking love and support and comfort, and I sought that from this other man who I had no idea, no clue that what I had endured in the past was going to be nothing compared to what I was getting ready to go through. Nothing. So from the middle of November 2011 to about January 2012, I was kind of in this little relationship with this man, this other man. We'll call him C. I started a relationship with C. My kids knew who he was. You know, I'd known him before my kids were even born. So, you know, I were going through, been a couple months. So we kind of established, he said, hey, since you don't have your own house, you can see the kids every weekend or every other weekend or whatever. And, you know, or every other day or whatever it is, you can see them. They just can't stay with you. There was a couple times where he let me have them during those several months. While we were staying with C and his mom and his uncle. His uncle, I found out later on, was actually and was filming me in the shower. I had no idea. C, he was 6'3", 6'4", 215 pounds, tattooed from head to toe pretty much. He was in a prison gang. You know, I had no idea about any of this. I had no idea how dangerous he was. He had a 2-year-old little daughter. It was just a crazy time. I started smoking pot again, smoking marijuana again, and at that point in time, the marijuana was not legal, but that was the one thing that him and I bonded over because he was bipolar, and that was the only thing that I felt like kept him calm because I started seeing this craziness come out of him, and he started becoming very controlling of me, like taking my vehicle for days. He took my vehicle for days. He shut myself and his mother into his mother's room for 3 days, and the only time we were allowed to be let out, we didn't even really get to shower. I think he let me shower once during those 3 days, and he was in the bathroom with me while I showered. There was actually a shower in his uncle's room because his uncle's house was a mess, and one of the showers didn't work in the bathroom. But he would escort me into the bathroom. He would sit outside the door. He had my phone. I wasn't allowed to talk to anybody, and I was like, I want to talk to my kids. He would literally dial the number and hold it up on speakerphone, and I got to talk to them for like a couple minutes. Same thing with my mom. But he shut us in the room for 3 days, and he kept saying people were watching him. He had the keys to my vehicle. He had my debit card. I was not allowed to do anything. His mother was kind of a little physically disabled, and she walked with a cane, so she couldn't really do anything. And then one day after the 3 days, he came into the room. He unlocked it, and he said, I just woke up. He had went to sleep. He had been awake, and I didn't know this. He had been up on meth for 3 full days. And being awake for 3 full days with no food and really no water, and you're drinking or you're doing drugs and all that kind of stuff, is just like on a bipolar person. He went into like a psychosomatic psychosis type of thing. He went into a psychosis, and he was very paranoid. But when he came off of that, he was normal, and he was great. He was wonderful to me. When he was not on drugs, he was wonderful to me. It was weird. It was really weird. So I stayed with him, and I kind of let that slide. That happened around his birthday, so I was like, okay, well, whatever. He decided to party during his birthday. Well, those times kept getting closer and closer to each other. Like it ended up kind of blending in, and he just got worse and worse and worse. And I just remember times where he took us 2 or 3 hours away in my vehicle, and he wouldn't let me even look up. There was one of my best friends who's now passed away, but she was there with her fiance, and the fiance was related to this guy. They were cousins, and if I even looked up and looked at her, he thought that we were communicating mentally with each other. Like, he was so crazy. I missed picking my kids up from school. I missed like 2 weeks of even seeing my children because of him. He wouldn't allow me to. He had complete physical control and mental control over me, and I wanted out so bad. I was not in that relationship that long. I tried to leave a couple times. I left one time while he was in the shower, I believe. I grabbed whatever I could while he was in the shower, and I got my vehicle and I left, and it was late at night. It was like midnight, and as crazy as it is, I went to this gas station. I called my mom and I was like, this is what's going on. She kind of knew what was going on, and I said, I need to get gas in my vehicle, and I need to go. I don't know where I need to go, but I need to get away from him. He's crazy. He's gonna kill me. Like, I was so scared. I pull up to the gas station and I look over and I'm getting gas, and it's my dad. At midnight, he was with my stepsister, and they were buying a pregnancy test, and she was barely 18 years old. And so he was like helping her, hey, let's go get a pregnancy test, you know. He was just that kind of person. But I saw my dad, and I got the gas and I pulled up there to go pay. And my dad looked over, and he walked over, and he goes, Amanda, Irene, what's wrong with you? What's going on? And I told him what was going on. And he went in and he paid for my gas, and he said, you get in my truck with your stepsister, and I'm going to drive your truck home. We're taking you to the farm. So they took me to the farm. It was the night my stepsister found out she's pregnant with her oldest son, and I had just left my abuser, and I just laid with her, and we cried together. And you know who you are. I'm thankful for you. But that was like in March or something. I don't really remember. February maybe of 2012. Anyway, I had to go back to his uncle's house to get my stuff, and he begged me to stay. He begged me to stay. And I was scared to leave again. I didn't have any help. I didn't know, you know, wasn't going to bring the cops over there because I knew that he had drugs over there, and, you know, it wasn't my house, and I was very ignorant to all that kind of stuff. I didn't have any help. Nobody, you know, other than that one cop telling me years before, hey, there's this yellow piece of paper, and that's all it was. That cop was still a cop during that time. I didn't want to get in trouble, you know, for anything. So I just didn't bring any cops over there. And he talked me into staying again. And this was like March or something. And I had just gotten a big check, like my income taxes. And I got my income taxes, and I had got school money. All my income taxes, it went into his account, and he used the income taxes to get himself a lawyer. And I used the money from school to get a house, or to rent a house. And I rented a house, and this guy came with me, and I didn't know that I needed a lawyer for at that point in time. I was more focused on just trying to do good and make sure that my kids can come stay with me. I had no idea I don't know. I just didn't know what was going on. I was very ignorant to this stuff. Anyway, so we lived together for like 2 months in that house, you know, March to April, May. Come May 23rd, 2012, let's back up, May 22nd, 2012, May 21st, something like that. A couple days before this incident happened, he had been gone for days again. He had been gone for 2 or 3 days. I had my own vehicle. I actually ended up buying an SUV, trading my truck in and getting a bigger vehicle, an SUV from, you know, to fit my kids in there. My kids were, so this is 2012. My son was 8 years old. My daughter was 6, getting ready to turn 7, or she just turned 7. And they stayed with me every other day, every every other day. And I was like, okay, you can do every other day since you're doing good. You have your own house, yada, yada. He didn't know about the abuse. I had my kids every other day, and it come to a point living with C that he was so crazy that I had my anxiety, and I was, and it would help him be calm and just be normal. And actually he would sleep a lot. It's like he took them anyway. I was just I was scared because without those, or without the marijuana, he was crazy and he wanted to go do meth, and the meth made him crazy, or more crazy. So my kids and I, actually, I taught my kids a different language. It's not a real language, but I taught them Double Dutch, and I taught them how to speak it. And I spoke to them in Double Dutch when he was near. He never said anything about it. He couldn't understand what we were saying, and I just told him it was just me being funny and it didn't mean anything. I think he believed me, but I was making plans with my children just in case he attacked us to leave. We were trying to be safe about things. And my kids went to their dad's one night. You know, it was every other night my kids went to their dad's, and he came back home. He had been gone for 2-3 days. He was high as a kite, up for 2-3 days. And the abuse started again. We had a friend there. He had a friend there, and he took me into my room. The C took me into our room, and the friend stayed out in the living room, and they were high as kites on meth. And he proceeded to make me be intimate with him when I didn't want to be. Let's just put it that way. For hours. Hours. And he got mad. He got very angry and got mad and started getting very paranoid. And I was scared. I was scared to death. I was scared of him. I knew it was coming. I was like, oh, I just felt it deep down in here. Something just wasn't right. I tried to sleep. I couldn't sleep because he was up high as a kite. And so I kept dozing off trying to stay awake, and it was hard. The next morning, the buddy left, the guy left, and he stayed there. C stayed there, and he was upset at me. He thought I was cheating on him. He grabbed a hold of my phone and pushed me down in my son's bedroom, or my daughter's bedroom, and he put his hands around me. And he stopped. He just stopped out of the blue. Got up, went to the other room. My kids were getting ready to come home. I told him my kids are going to be here. So he straightened up a little bit. He was high as a kite. He straightened up. And I even wanted to call him, hey, don't bring the kids over here. But I knew if I started doing that he wouldn't let me have them. Just because I didn't really have any say-so, and I didn't know that I had rights like that. But I didn't want them to be involved in I didn't want them to be there while crazy things were happening to me. But he brought the kids over, and the kids weren't there very long, and I told them in that other language, we're gonna have to get out of here. He's crazy and he's being mean right now. And he started being mean to my kids, and he had a cigarette in his mouth, and he got in my face. My daughter was like latched onto me, you know, she's like my mini me, and she was just kind of holding on to me. She's 7 years old. And she was holding on to me, hugging me. My son was standing over here, and he had my lanyard with my keys around his neck. And C got up, and he grabbed a hold of me, grabbed a hold of my arm, and started dragging me and my daughter across the room. My daughter wouldn't let go. I was trying to get her to let go because I didn't want her to get hurt, but he drug us across the room, and my son took that lanyard off of from around his neck and started hitting his face with it. And he took off, and he left. When it came to kids, I don't think he was ever abusive to kids. Like, there was something about children that like will come up, and he was like, I can't do this right now. He left on foot. He left, and I was scared. I locked the doors and we were scared, and I kept looking out, and I remember not seeing him. And so we gathered some stuff. You know, we didn't really gather much stuff. We just grabbed what we had. Like, I grabbed my purse, and I told the kids, I said, get in the car. And I got in the car, and I still had money from my school, my college. You know, that's why I have $60,000 in debt for college student loans. It's because it helped us get away. I went and got a hotel room. I was scared, and I called my mom, and I was trying to make a plan. I didn't want to bother my dad. I didn't want to bother anybody. Nobody really believed me. Oh, you're just going to stay. You all are on drugs, all this kind of stuff. My mom's the only one that believed me. And, you know, I told her, I said, I don't know what to do. He was trying to call me. He kept trying to call me. I remember my stepsister, she was big pregnant. They like kind of, you know, showing by then. It was been a couple months since she found out she was pregnant, and she showed up, and she was like, I'll go over there with you. And I was like, you are pregnant. You do not need to go over here with me. She goes, he's not going to do anything to it. She goes, I promise you that. So he wasn't there. We went there, and I grabbed some clothes for the kids, went back to the hotel, and I realized I didn't even grab anything for myself. I was so worried and so like scared and paranoid that he was going to show up. So I just grabbed whatever was in the dryer or whatever. It happened to be all the kids' clothes, and I was like, I don't have any clothes. So I told the kids, I said, listen, we're going to go back to the house, and I want you to stay in the car with the AC on. It was May. I said, you do not get out of this vehicle unless I tell you to. You stay in this vehicle. Because I was scared. I went in there by myself. I didn't see anybody. I didn't hear anything. I walked through the whole entire house, looked in the backyard, didn't see anything. So I went in to get clothes, and I just started putting clothes in a trash bag or a Walmart bag. And I was opening my top drawer in my underwear drawer, and I was just scooping it out in there. And all of a sudden I hear, oh, that's what you're going to do. And I turn around, and it was him. C was standing there, and he was high. His eyes were black. He was sweating profusely. At this point in time, he'd probably been up for like 5 days. And I remember having recordings of him too, but he'd probably been up for 5 days, and he was overly paranoid. He was bipolar, schizophrenic. And he was a beast. And he had magic superpowers at that time. Physical. I was scared to death. Scared to death. And he told me, he said, drop the bag. Sit your ass on that chair right there, on that couch right there. And I said, my kids are out in the car. Please don't do this. We'll come back in. We'll be fine. Just please don't do this. Please don't hurt us. And he said, I'm not going to touch the kids. And he looked at me straight in the eyes, and he said, I'm going to, just don't know how to do it yet. And at that point in time, the kids were in the car. And I thought I was going to die. Thought he was going to... He picked up the coffee table. And I knew he was going to hit me with it. But something happened, and he put the coffee table down, and he went out, and he looked out the window, and he looked out the door, and he saw my kids, and he said, I can't do this with them here. And I was so scared. I said, please leave my kids alone. Please don't mess with them. He said, I'm not ever going to touch your kids, but I'm going to kill you. And I didn't know what to do. I was praying. I was just like, what do I do? What do I do? And so I was sitting there on that couch, and I didn't have my phone. He actually took my phone from me, I think, or I left my phone in the car with the kids, and I didn't know what to do. And he kept looking at me, and he kept inching toward the front door, like torn about what he needed to do, because if he went out the front door, he couldn't see me anymore in the living room the way it was. He couldn't see me. He couldn't keep an eye on me. Well, he made the choice to go out the front door. And I thought I locked my door. I thought I locked the car door. So I thought my kids are safe. He can't get in there. And I told my kids not to move. And so I took that split second, and I believe the split second saved my life, but I took that split second and I ran out the back door and I went around and I saw this big, huge in the backyard. I saw another laying in the backyard, and I went around to this very elderly lady's house next door. I went around her backyard and I went to her front door and I was banging, banging, banging. Well, she had a walker. And I said, please let me in, please let me in. I'm being, you know, the guy's gonna, he's gonna, my kids are out there. And she, poor lady, did not know what was going on, but I didn't know what else to do. And I heard him say, Amanda, and he was like right out in her front yard, almost to the front door. And I kind of had to move her over, not hard. I just kind of physically moved her over, and I went inside and I shut and bolt locked her door, and I found her phone and I called 911, and I went to find the nearest window, which happened to be her bedroom. And I was on the phone with the 911, and I was watching my kids, and I was trying to bang on the door, telling them where I was at, and I called 911 at the same time. And he jumped in my car, and he took off with my kids. He kidnapped my kids. But luckily, he stopped at the stop sign right there in the corner, and my son grabbed my daughter's hand and they jumped out of the car. They jumped out of the car and he took off with my car, and I didn't care. My kids came to the lady's door and I let them in. We locked the door, and just a couple minutes later the cops showed up, and I wasn't the only one that called the cops. He wrecked my car into the side of a building, into a barber shop, and he had my wallet and my ID and my phone and everything, and the lady knew who I was, and she saw that he had all my things, and she called 911, and all my stuff, all my belongings, my kids' stuff was strung for over a mile. They shut the entire highway down. They shut the highway down. All my stuff was just strung from my house almost, or from, I don't know if he was pouring my stuff out the window or what was going on, but it was strung from my house all the way to like a mile down the road where they found him. They found him hiding in the woods, and they arrested him. He had ran from where he wrecked. He had actually went into the barber shop and was trying to hide, and then he saw that they were calling 911, and he left, and he just ran and hid in the woods across the road. And they arrested him. And that's what happened. After that day when he was in jail, I ended up going to the safe house with my kids. Still in the middle of this. I met a victim advocate there. I got a tattoo, forgiven, on my arm, that I forgive myself for putting myself through that, and I had forgiven him for doing that to me. I had to go to court against him. I remember the judge calling me up there by myself, and he put his hand over the microphone and he looked at me and he said, if he pisses your way in your direction, I'm going to put him away for 30 years. I had a restraining order against him. He stayed in jail until he could bail out. He stayed in there for over 2 months, I believe. 2 or 3 months. He was in there for quite a while, for a little bit. And after I went to court a couple times, knew he was going to stay in jail, I moved out of the safe house and I moved in with my friends. And I remember one night, he was related to one of the guys, and it was the friend that was there the night that he made me do bad stuff with him that I didn't want to do. And I was oblivious to being like, hey, these are probably not the best people to hang out with, but I did. They made me feel like family. They were nice to me. They were good to my kids, and they literally lived 2 miles down the road from me. I could see my kids all the time. I was very unstable at that point, and I just wanted stability. I just wanted a home. I wanted to take care of my kids, and I didn't want to go through that anymore. Everything that I told you was just a small snippet of what happened, a brief snippet of what happened. I was abused for several months with that man. I was not only abused, but I was held against my will. It was very scary. It was very scary. Eventually, I ended up moving with my best friend to a different town a couple hours away because he showed up at the house I was staying at. I was scared. He ended up moving on very quickly. When he got out of jail, he started dating another person, and he beat her up really bad and walked himself to the jail and turned himself in and got arrested, and he ended up going to prison. There's other things that happened too, which I'm going to hopefully be able to have them tell their stories about the same man, but that did a number on me. My things that my did, I was scared of him being abusive to me, but I don't think I feared my life. And with this man, with C, I feared my life, and I feared for my kids' safety too, my children's safety as well. And I feared for anybody he was around. Like, I feared for the safety of other people in general when he was around. He was bipolar, schizophrenic, and he was very volatile, and he was very physically abusive and very aggressive, and he was a big guy. He was in prison off and on for a long time for the remainder of his life, and I kept getting updates from Movans. Movans is a thing in Missouri where they update you about your abuser and where they're going, like, hey, he's going to this prison. And his abuse towards other people got way worse. And a year ago, April 12th, 2024, which is the day after my daughter's birthday, April 12th, 2024, he still in that same area in Missouri, and I no longer live in Missouri. I live in the South. But he went to go rob a bank, or rob a store, and then he went across the street to rob somebody's house, was trying to steal their vehicle to get away. And he young man in the stomach, and the young man happened to be carrying, and he C in the head. So that past abuser is no longer on this earth. And at that point in time, it's been almost a year since that happened, but at that point in time, I felt so many different emotions. But the biggest emotion I felt was relief. Like, I never have to worry about that guy ever again. I never have to worry about him ever again. He is not on this earth anymore. As sad as the situation was, because I know his upbringing was bad, and I know that he was mentally just not all there. He was mentally disabled. He had bipolar schizophrenia, so he was mentally just not there, and he was institutionalized because of all the years he spent in prison and jail and stuff. So I ended up having major PTSD from that. PTSD from my ex, but I didn't realize that I was having PTSD from my ex, but I was having PTSD more so from those 6 months, or however long it was, November of 2011 to May of 2012. So about 6 or 7 months I was with him. But I had PTSD. I was diagnosed with PTSD. I was already diagnosed with general anxiety disorder because of all the trauma, but I also had PTSD, and I didn't know it from my past trauma from my childhood. And I went through intense therapy, and it changed my life. Later on that year, my ex actually gained custody of my son. That broke me. That broke me because I was doing good, and I just wanted to be a good mom to my kids. But it broke my heart, and hurts still to this day. But I only got to see him every other weekend, and I ended up, having full custody of my daughter, because my daughter was not my child. And things ended up happening later on in life. I got my shit together, basically, and I was a single mom for the remainder of my kids being children. But I allowed my ex got better. he didn't abuse anybody else that I knew of, and him and I ended up being on okay terms to be able to co-parent for our children, because my daughter was basically his daughter. When my daughter was 13, she came to me and asked me if her dad could adopt her, and I allowed it to happen. So he was her legal guardian. We ended up having kids every other day. We did the every other day thing for a long time. When they became teenagers, we did every other week because high school got crazy. And I was a single mom pretty much for the remainder of their, their high school years until Ben came into my life, and Ben's been great, but that's hard, and it affected me in a big way. But in 2014, backing up, in 2014, 2 years after that incident happened, I lived with my dad, and that was kind of the time where I was like really trying to get back on my feet, and I did. After that, when 2014 came, and it was 4th of July 2014, I just had an epiphany, like, it's time to get your shit together for good. And I drew this tulip. There it is right there, this tulip. I drew it on a piece of paper, and I just called it the Tulip Garden. And I was like, I think I need to make some flyers, because I feel like I want to help people who've been through my situation, because I started kind of hearing things around town like, hey, this person got beat up, or this person's in an abusive relationship. And I was like, you know what, I'm gonna stand up, and I'm gonna take a stand against these people that are doing these bad things to these other people, and I want to be an advocate. I want to help other people. And I started passing out paper flyers. In 2014, I drove to town, and I would walk along the square, along the main street, and I would just go, hey, can I hang this flyer up? I want to help people, be safe. And I learned a lot when I lived in the safe house and stuff. And next thing I know, I'm getting a call from the TV station, the news station, saying, hey, I see what you're doing, and I want to do a story on you. And her name was Stacy, and she was very kind, and she interviewed me, and I had a meeting with the Ministerial Alliance, which the Ministerial Alliance is all of the pastors in that town, basically, and they helped people. It was just people that I was trying to talk to get help, the help that I needed to do this, to be an advocate for these people. I needed help financially, and I ended up becoming a nonprofit organization. I had my 501c3. I was on the news several times. I was in the newspapers. I was writing articles for magazines. I was on social media doing videos, and this is 2014. I did that consistently until about 2017, when I realized I needed to have income. I wasn't making any money, and I had to financially be able to support my kids. So my dad ended up letting me move into the farmhouse, and he moved out of the farmhouse, and he essentially gave me the farmhouse to live in with my kids. And that was in 2017. And I lived there for 5 full years with my kids. And Ben came along in 2019, 2020, but it was just important to me to help people, important to me to help people. And I wanted to build a battered women's shelter, but I did not get to do that. I didn't have the funding to do that. And I'm still pushing today, 11 years later from 2014, but 13 years later from that incident, I am still pushing to be a victim advocate, and I am a victim advocate. I became certified last year, actually, and I'm here to help other people. So this is just the overall story of what happened with me. I cannot go into full details because of YouTube's policies, but my name is Amanda Martin, and I'm a survivor of domestic violence, and I want to help you tell your story. Thank you for listening.